I've been a snowplow driver for over a decade, and I've seen my share of brutal storms. But nothing compares to that blizzard in December of 2017. The storm was relentless, a whiteout that swallowed the mountains and everything on them. My job that night was to keep the main mountain road clear, a road notorious for its steep cliffs and sharp curves. I started my shift as usual, prepped with a thermos of coffee and the local radio crackling in the background. The first couple of hours were uneventful. The snow fell hard, but nothing I hadn't handled before. Around 9 p.m., I reached one of the highest and most isolated stretches of the road. That's when I saw it. A faint outline of a car, buried nose first in a snowdrift just off the shoulder. I pulled over, leaving the plow's lights on as I trudged through the snow to investigate. It was an older sedan, the kind that shouldn't be on a mountain road in a storm like this. The driver's door was ajar, snow blowing inside. I peeked in. No one was there. A bag sat on the passenger seat, and the glove compartment hung open, its contents scattered. I called over the radio, but it was just static. The storm had knocked out all communications. I stood there for a moment, debating. That's when I noticed the footprints, leading away from the car and into the dense forest. Great, I muttered. Someone was out there, and in this weather, they wouldn't last long. I grabbed my flashlight and followed the tracks. They were fresh, barely starting to fill with snow. Whoever it was couldn't be far. About 10 minutes in, the tracks started to look strange. The person had been stumbling, zigzagging through the trees. Then, I saw something that made my stomach drop. Another set of footprints. These were larger, heavier, and they were following the first. The forest was eerily silent, save for the wind howling through the trees. My flashlight flickered, casting long, shifting shadows. The snow was falling harder now, and I was losing visibility. But I kept going, my boots crunching in the snow. After another few minutes, I came to a small clearing. The footprints stopped abruptly. The snow was disturbed, like there'd been a struggle. Scattered around were personal items, a scarf, a glove, and a single bloody handprint smeared on a tree trunk. My heart was pounding in my chest. I turned to leave, but then I heard it, the crunch of snow behind me. I swung my flashlight around, and for a split second I saw him, a man, gaunt and wild-eyed, standing just beyond the tree line. He was wearing ragged clothes, and in his hand he held a hunting knife. He took a step forward. "Hey," I shouted, my voice trembling. "I'm just trying to help someone." He didn't respond. He took another step. I bolted. The snow was deep, and every step felt like I was dragging my legs through cement. I could hear him behind me, his footsteps deliberate, unhurried. He wasn't running, but he didn't need to. The plow was in sight, its lights a beacon in the storm. I reached it, fumbling with the door handle before throwing myself inside. I locked the doors just as the man slammed against the driver's side window, his knife tapping the glass. The plow wouldn't start. The cold had choked the engine. I turned the key again and again, my breath fogging up the cab. Outside, the man stared at me, his eyes devoid of anything human. He raised the knife and started pounding on the window. The glass began to crack. Finally, the engine roared to life. I threw the plow into reverse, slamming into the man and sending him sprawling into the snow. Without looking back, I sped down the mountain, my hands shaking on the wheel. When I reached the nearest outpost, I told the officers everything. They looked at me like I was crazy. The next morning, a search team went up the mountain. They found the car, but no footprints, no personal items, and no bloody handprint. The only thing they found was my plow's tire marks and a single hunting knife buried in the snow. It was supposed to be a simple holiday trip. My wife, our 2 kids, and I were driving through a remote stretch of highway, heading to visit family for Christmas. The weather report had warned of a storm, but we didn't anticipate how quickly it would turn into a full-blown blizzard. The snow fell so thick we could barely see the road, and the wind howled like it was trying to rip the car apart. By the time we saw the sign for a motel, we were desperate. Vacancy flickered weakly beneath the word Oak Ridge Inn, but everything else about the place screamed, "Run down." The neon lights buzzed and blinked erratically, and the building itself looked like it hadn't seen maintenance in decades. Still, it was better than braving the storm. I parked the car, and we all bundled up to walk inside. The lobby was eerily silent, lit only by a single flickering fluorescent light. Dust covered the old furniture and the wallpaper was peeling. Behind the counter stood a man in his late 50s, wearing a faded flannel shirt. His face was gaunt, with hollow eyes that seemed to look straight through you. "Are you open?" I asked, my voice echoing in the empty room. The man nodded slowly. "Sure are. Got a few rooms left." His tone was calm, almost too calm. He pulled a key from the wall behind him and slid it across the counter. When I asked about the price, he simply said, "You can pay when you leave." It felt strange, but I chalked it up to the storm. Maybe he was just being lenient. We took the key, thanked him, and headed down the dimly lit hallway to our room. The room was as bad as you'd expect. The beds were old, with stained, sagging mattresses. A thick layer of dust coated the furniture, and the faint smell of mildew lingered in the air. The man had warned us that the power was out, but he gave us a few candles and matches. "Better than being out there," he'd said with a grim smile. We laid down some blankets we had in the car to cover the beds and lit the candles. There was an ancient gas-powered space heater in the corner, which we turned on for warmth. It crackled and popped as it came to life, filling the room with a faint, metallic smell. Despite our unease, exhaustion eventually overtook us. The wind howled outside, rattling the thin windows, but inside, it was quiet. Too quiet. Around 2 a.m., a loud knock jolted us awake. I grabbed my phone for light and approached the door cautiously. "Who is it?" I called out, my voice shaking. "State Police," a voice answered. "Open the door." I cracked the door open to see 2 officers standing there, their faces barely visible through the swirling snow. "You're trespassing," one of them said, his voice firm but not unkind. "Trespassing?" I asked, bewildered. "We checked in here. The man at the desk gave us a key." The officers exchanged a glance. "This motel's been abandoned for years," the other officer said. "No one's supposed to be here." My stomach dropped. "No, there was a man. He checked us in, gave us this room key." The officers stepped inside, their flashlights scanning the room. "Did he say anything else?" I told them about the man's appearance, how he didn't charge us, and how he'd given us candles. They looked at each other again, clearly concerned. "Where's your car?" one officer asked. We rushed outside, only to find our car missing. Panic set in as I realized we'd been tricked. The officers assured us they'd search for it and drove us back to the station. We were shaken but grateful for their help. About 2 hours later, another officer radioed in. They'd found our car abandoned in a snowbank about 5 miles out of town. There were footprints leading from the car into the woods, but no sign of the man. "Do you think he was planning to come back?" my wife asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The officer shook his head. "Hard to say, but people like that, they don't usually stop with just a car." We retrieved our vehicle, thanked the officers, and left that town as fast as the icy roads allowed. Even now, the memory of that night haunts me. I often think about the man, who he was, where he went, and what might have happened if the police hadn't knocked on our door. I've always loved the quiet solitude of hiking. There's something about being surrounded by nature, far away from the noise of daily life, that feels freeing. A few winters ago, I decided to take on a longer section of the Appalachian Trail. It was a personal challenge, something I'd been preparing for months. The day I set out, everything seemed perfect. The forecast called for light snow, nothing I couldn't handle, and I was eager to finally put my plans into motion. But a late start, thanks to unexpected traffic, meant I hit the trail much later than I'd planned. I had about 8 miles to cover to reach my first campsite, and as the sun dipped below the horizon, I realized I wasn't going to make it before dark. That's when I saw it, a small cabin, barely visible through the thickening snow. Relief washed over me. Shelter. The cabin looked old, maybe even abandoned, but smoke rose from the chimney. I knocked on the door, and within seconds, it opened. A man stood there, mid-40s, scruffy but not unkempt. His clothes were weathered, and he had the kind of presence that made you feel both at ease and on edge. "Caught in the storm?" he asked, his voice friendly. "Yeah," I replied, explaining my situation. "Come on in," he said, stepping aside. "It's too dangerous to keep going in this weather." The cabin was small and sparse, but the fire in the corner radiated warmth. There was a single table with 2 chairs, a small cot, and a few basic supplies scattered around. "Name's Mike," he said, offering his hand. "Lena," I replied, shaking it. Mike seemed welcoming enough, and we shared some food as we talked. He mentioned he'd been out on the trail for a few weeks, enjoying the isolation. At first, it felt nice to have some company, someone to share stories with. But as the night wore on, Mike's questions began to shift. "So you're out here alone?" he asked, his tone a bit too curious. "Yeah, I like the solitude," I said, trying to sound nonchalant. "Brave," he said, leaning back. "You don't get scared? No boyfriend or anything to keep you company?" I forced a laugh. "No, just me." His smile lingered a little too long. "Huh. Surprising." I tried to steer the conversation back to hiking, but Mike kept digging. "Ever had any interesting experiences out here?" he asked, his eyes narrowing slightly. "Not really," I said, my unease growing. Mike didn't press further, but his gaze felt heavy, like he was sizing me up. Feeling the weight of the conversation, I decided to call it a night. "It's been a long day," I said, standing. "I think I'll get some sleep." Mike nodded. "Take the cot. I'll sleep out here by the fire." I muttered a quick thanks and retreated to the small bedroom, locking the flimsy door behind me. The room was cold, the firelight from the main room barely reaching through the cracks. I lay down fully clothed, my flashlight and a heavy metal lamp from the nightstand within reach. Hours passed. The storm howled outside, and I drifted in and out of restless sleep. Around midnight, I woke to a sound. Soft footsteps. My heart raced as I heard the faint creak of the bedroom door handle turning. The door opened slowly, and there stood Mike. His silhouette filled the doorway, and as he stepped inside, I could see the glint of something in his hand. "Couldn't sleep," he said softly. "Thought we could talk some more." I gripped the lamp tighter. "Mike, I think you should go back to the fire," I said, my voice steady, despite the fear bubbling inside me. He didn't move. Come on, Lena. Don't be like that. We've got the whole night to ourselves. In a flash, Mike lunged toward me, his hand reaching for my arm. I swung the lamp as hard as I could, catching him on the side of the head. He stumbled back, cursing. Adrenaline surged as I grabbed my pack and bolted for the door. Mike was dazed but recovering quickly. I sprinted into the main room, threw open the cabin door, and ran into the snowstorm. The cold air bit at my face, but I didn't stop. I ran blindly, the snow whipping around me, muffling everything but the sound of my pounding heart. Behind me, I could hear Mike shouting, his voice growing fainter as I pushed further into the woods. After what felt like an eternity, I saw a distant light. A ranger's snowmobile. I waved my arms frantically, and the ranger pulled up, immediately sensing something was wrong. Between gasps, I told him about Mike. We returned to the cabin, but it was empty. Mike was gone, leaving behind only the faint embers of the dying fire. The ranger explained that the cabin wasn't an official shelter and that it often attracted drifters. They never found Mike, and to this day, the memory of that night haunts me. I thought I was prepared for anything the wilderness could throw at me, but nothing could have prepared me for the danger waiting inside that cabin. Thanks for stopping by the channel. We hope you enjoyed these 3 truly terrifying stories. If you want to hear more just like this one, subscribe to our channel and turn notifications on so you can be reminded when we post a new long-form video every Tuesday at 10 a.m. and a short video every Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday at 6 p.m. Central Time. If you have a story you'd like to hear read on the channel, email it to us at officialnightmarenarratives@gmail.com, and you might just hear your story read in a future episode. Thanks again for listening, and stay spooky, friends. We'll catch you in the next one.